Hi, welcome to Parenting and Teaching with Richie Huffman. I'm Richie Huffman, President and CEO of Celebrate Preschools. On these podcasts, we'll be talking to real parents, teachers about what's going on at home, in the classroom, and everything in between. I hope you find these conversations informative, helpful, sometimes funny, and sometimes serious. So let's go ahead and get started. Hello, and I am Richie.
And this is Ali.
And today we'll be talking about what to look for in choosing a daycare, visiting a daycare. So Ali, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting podcast because since our first one, and this is our sixth now?
Number 6.
We've had guests every time. So it's just us today, and I thought it was kind of perfect for us to just sit down and chat because you're coming as a parent and a daycare owner, and I'm coming as a teacher and hopefully a future parent. So I think we can have an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Originally, I also wanted to call this top 5 things to look for in a daycare so we could give listeners a good kind of checklist to look as they're searching. But then I was like, no, I kept thinking about it and I was like, I don't know if it's 5 things.
Yeah.
I think it changes. So I wanted to call it what to look for in a daycare because I think that through talking, you and I will realize that we have maybe some differences and some similarities in what we would look for.
Yeah. Right away, you hear the phrase or the word daycare versus preschool. When you hear daycare or preschool, is there a difference, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think we were talking the other day and we both went to say, I went to say daycare and you went to say preschool and I corrected my language and I went preschool and you were like, wait, don't do that.
Right.
What does that actually mean? So I've been thinking about it a lot and I think that I didn't go to a preschool as we might call it here because I didn't go to like a formal daycare or formal preschool growing up. I was at a neighbor's house and I always called it daycare. So I think a little bit of it's just kind of how I was raised and where I went. And I'm coming from the public school setting where that's what I think of as a daycare, and then you go to school.
Right.
But I'm learning a little bit more as I'm here and as I'm doing research and I'm talking to you that I think it makes more sense to call it a preschool when it's more of that like typical early learning experience that focuses more on academics than what a daycare would. So I'm kind of shifting my language here at Celebrate to start calling it a preschool. However, I think it's a term that kind of goes back and forth and they really are pretty much the same thing. Yeah,
and a lot of times now I hear parents even saying to their little ones, are you excited or are you happy here at school? So it's not even daycare, it's not even preschool, it's school, and I think they probably just say that just to prepare.
Yeah, and I think little kids get excited too. They say they're going to school. Yeah, and even if they have older siblings, it's kind of a special moment. So I hear parents saying it to tiny little kids too. They're saying we're going to school today, and it's new to me for sure because I've never called it school. But I have a sister-in-law with a baby, and while she was still pregnant, she was looking for schools, and she's telling her friends that her 3-month-old is going to school, and it's just kind of a shift in language. But
but I think when you say preschool or you say school, I think it's referring to a higher quality of teaching.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes you focus more on academics rather than just going somewhere where there's a caretaker and you're having snack and playtime and great social interactions. But I think calling it a preschool kind of adds in those academic learning skills and those early learning skills that are going to be important as kids go into kindergarten.
Yeah. Is my little one actually getting prepared to enter into kindergarten?
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus, as you said, like just custodial type care.
Yeah, just someone taking care of.
Which is important.
Right.
Yeah.
So I kind of tried to sit down and think what, as a future mother, what would I look for in a daycare? So one of the first things I kind of thought of is being safe and secure because that's a big part of what's going on in the community and schools right now anyway. So I almost listed it as number 1.
It is, yeah.
Do you agree with that?
We polled our parents and because there's a big push for early education and making sure these little ones are prepared for kindergarten. When we did our survey, the number 1 thing that parents were looking for was to make sure that their children were safe and secure.
Well, then I guess I was spot on.
Dead on. Yeah.
So our 2 podcasts ago, I guess now, we talked about accreditation. So I also think it's important just kind of looking back at how we talked to Jen from MSDE about how important it is we're calling this a preschool. So if we're looking at academics and we're looking at early learning for kids getting into kindergarten and public schools and kind of starting their career of schooling, I think it's really important to look at what centers are recommended and accredited, not just by your friends and family, but also when you do research on them and when you look at what that school's known for. I think it's important to find those centers that have been recognized by the state and are accredited so that
And as I said in our last podcast, like I wasn't a big fan of accreditation until we started getting our schools accredited. But accreditation does, raise the quality of care, and you can immediately see the difference in preschools or daycares that are accredited. I mean, it's like
and it puts a stamp on it. I mean, it's like immediately, it's a great place to be.
Yeah.
It's so much work.
State approved, right? The state says this is a program that's a high quality program for these little ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Another part of my top 5 that I was thinking of is being warm and welcoming, because as a teacher, that was always something that I really wanted to make sure that I made my personality known as somebody who was warm and welcoming. When we had take a peek night, when the kids got to come in over the summer, and back to school night when you meet all your parents with your kids, I think it's really important that first time interaction, and not just the first time, but every time's interaction. Yeah. Every time the parents come and drop off their kid or pick them up or come to an event, is it warm? Is it welcoming? And not just by one person, not just by their teacher, but by everybody. Yeah. Teachers who don't even know their child from another room, or people from the front office, and people who are just in the building. I know here every time I walk into a center, everybody says hi. And I think that's really important, because there's not always places you'll find that. Yeah,
that was my number one. My number one was, how is the energy from the director all the way back to the teaching team?
Yeah.
Right? Because I think that energy speaks to passion, right?
Yeah.
Is this team, is this director, is my little one's teacher, is she or he passionate about what they're doing?
Yeah, and if they're all doing it together as a team, it almost ensures that it's going to continue when you're not there. It's not just somebody putting on a show for you when you walk in. It's the place you're dropping your baby at, and you're leaving knowing that when you're at work or you're somewhere else, that it's still warm and welcoming even without you there.
I would agree. My second one on that, after the energy and the energy that's coming from the teaching team, and more importantly the director, because she's the one leading that teaching team, right? I mean, she is the one that is setting that culture of that school. The second one I had was the classroom arrangement.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because I know public schools really push for that too. And there's a big push right now for student-centered learning, and how kids can kind of move about the room as they need. And there's way less of a push for kids to be sitting at a desk and looking at a teacher anymore. So I think that's important too, because that also goes back to being safe. Is how are your desks and your tables and your bookshelves and your rugs and everything arranged in the room, so that it's still somewhere that is safe for the child, but also makes sense for learning.
Yeah. I mean, great points, right? I had classroom management or classroom arrangement also, because as a parent, you can immediately look into a classroom and see my child's opportunities of learning.
Yeah, so true.
Like you
from
can
the calendar to the carpet to the reading corner, right?
Exactly. If you walk into, one of the things I'm most proud of in the Celebrity Centers, when you walk in, you can immediately see in the classrooms exactly what your children will be learning. There is a science community. There is language and literacy. There is math, right? Each one of those, and that's kind of what I call classroom arrangements, right? But you can immediately see as a mom what they will be learning. And then you can ask deeper questions of what's going to come out of this learning area.
Yeah, I think that goes to even something as silly as bulletin boards.
Yeah.
I don't know if parents always think of how much time and energy and thought goes into bulletin boards, and teachers are constantly changing them. And sometimes they're cute and they're pictures of your kids, but they also show a lot of learning in them.
Yep.
And I know as a teacher, it was one of my biggest tasks. Like, I have to get this bulletin board done today, and it would take more than a day, because I wanted it to show anybody who walked by my classroom or who walked into my classroom, what have we done? What are we working on? What are we learning? And what are we taking away from this?
Yeah.
So bulletin boards go along with classroom organization and space. And
I mean, you and I live this and breathe this every single day, right? So I want to make sure that for our audience, when they're looking for a preschool for their children, that we can keep this as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Right. So, I want to be careful that we don't use, these big words, not that we've used big words yet, but just make it simple, right?
Yeah.
I would just say, if you don't see that classroom environment that just screams learning, right, then move on.
Yep.
Move on to the next one. If you don't see, the science area and the math area and the handwriting area, depending on what age child you're looking for, the resources are not there.
Yeah, it should make sense.
Yeah, that means the learning environment's not there, right? So get out.
Yeah,
move on.
Use your eyes for sure. Look through the hallways. Look up front. Look at the boards. Look at the walls and the areas in the classroom. For sure, you can do a lot of learning from just looking around a room.
And then in that same vein, is even now that we see the different areas throughout the classroom of learning, are the resources available? Like, look at the shelves. Are they labeled? Are there resources? If I'm in science, is there science material there that would also support the lesson plan?
Yeah. I was told as a teacher, I feel like every training I went to, they said, is your classroom purposeful? Is every space purposeful? So when you said the word labeled, and I know it takes sometimes an organized teacher to be labeled, but labeling also has purpose. And so if your kids know where things go and they're taking responsibility for cleaning up and organizing and being responsible for their own actions, but also their things, I always called my classroom our home. So it was our home while we were at school, and you have to take care of it like it's your home. So I think that's really important with staying organized and keeping your space the way it was at the start of the year to the end of the year. It should be partially the kids' responsibility too, to take that ownership of their space.
Agreed.
I think that my last one was engaging. So I think you can see that too, whether there's kids in the room or not. You can tell whether a classroom is engaging. It doesn't have to necessarily be the activity they're doing, but it can also just be an overall, is this classroom engaging? Does it look exciting? Does my child want to come to school because this is a safe, friendly, exciting environment that's filled with learning and opportunities and, like you said, resources?
Yep. And then from there, I look around the classroom. Is there evidence of learning? Right?
Yeah.
Is there evidence of whether, child-made activities that actually came from out of math or out of science or out of any of these learning environments?
Yeah, and that's exactly why I didn't want to call this top 5, because evidence of learning is going into being engaging and going into being organized and going into the classroom setup. It kind of all blends together, but again, it goes back to just opening your eyes and really looking around at what can you learn from a classroom even without kids in it.
Yeah. I got 2 stomper questions here for parents.
Okay.
I think they're phenomenal, and because I've toured a ton of our competitors, and this is where parents never go, and this is where parents need to go. My number 1 stomper question is, what is your discipline policy?
Okay.
If you have 15 or 20 little ones in a classroom, you're gonna have, as a teacher, there's gonna have to be discipline.
Yeah.
Right. So my number 1 or one of my stomper questions is ask the teacher, ask the director, what is your discipline policy?
Yeah, and I personally think that they should be able to point to it right away.
What do you mean by that?
Where is it? So in my classroom, I taught older kids. I had 1st and 2nd grade, so it's a little bit older than some of the kids we're talking about at preschools, but my kids took ownership over what our classroom rules were. So it's whether it's cleaning up your toys and putting them into the correct labeled baskets, or making sure that your chair is pushed in so nobody falls because it's safe. Those are kinds of things that go along with behavior and taking responsibility for classroom rules. Yeah. So I think to some extent there should be either a visual or words around the room, whether it's on a poster or bulletin board or somewhere, that the kids can see it and be reminded of it daily. And the teachers can remember and show somebody, this is it. This is what it looks like.
Yeah. And I would also ask them, why did as a preschool, why did their school choose this type of discipline policy?
Yeah.
To see if they really truly believe in the policy,
and understand it.
And if they don't, that tells me that should tell our parents that they're not upholding that discipline policy, right? It's just something that we say when parents ask the question.
Yeah, I agree that's definitely could be a red flag if that stumps somebody.
Yep.
What's your second one?
my other stomping question is, and I see it time and time and time again, the teacher that's teaching your child is probably one of the most important, right? You meet the director and they give you the tour and they tell you this and they tell you that. But this teacher is the one that's spending 8-9 hours with your child. Yeah. I see so many parents, and I call our competitors, I call it the hallway tour, right? It's up and down the hallway. They're peeking in the glass, right? They're peeking into the classroom. The teacher may acknowledge or wave or whatever, but the director is, talking in my ear as I'm observing this classroom, right? And looking for everything that we just mentioned, right? You have to get into that classroom. You have to get in there and ask those questions to that teacher, right? It's like, this teacher's with my child 9 hours. Do I like her?
Right.
Right? Do you think my child will like her? Right? What is her philosophy? What's her teaching style? Right?
And maybe not even just the teacher that your child's going into. If they're 2 and they're going into a 2's room, eventually they'll be 3 and 4, and they'll move into the toddler room and the preschool room and the kindergarten readiness or whatever the center calls that. But I think that's important too, is going back to talking about how it's a team and it's a school, and how is everybody? I mean, you might not love every teacher you always have, but to some extent they should be on the same page enough that you can say, this is my child's teacher this year. Yeah. But next year he'll be in this room. Yeah. And that's important too.
I mean, we could sit here and talk about, the things that we think are important. But as moms and dads, we all have those special questions, right? Those because no one knows our children better than we do, right? So, you got to get into the classroom and ask those teachers that are caring for your children those most important questions, and see and see the response, right? Because when that happens, let's say one of my children, Camden, let's say that Camden's not a big fan of this, right? Whatever it may be, and just ask them the question: how would you handle if Camden's not a big fan of finishing his lunch? Okay. How would you, Miss Kraus, how would you handle that?
How would I handle him not at school if I was his teacher?
I'm just saying, that's a prompt question that needs to be in, because that will happen, right? And she's like, well, I'm a big fan that everybody should eat their lunch. Well, right away we have a problem, right? Because Camden doesn't eat all his lunch. Right. I'm just giving that an example of ask deeper questions to the person, the teacher that's actually going to be
and directly related to your child. Exactly like your example for Camden.
Exactly.
Kids all have their own kind of thing. So
exactly.
He will not nap.
Right.
What are we going to do?
Exactly. What are you going to do? Right? How will you handle this? And I just think that's so critical, right? It's going to tell you right away whether or not this is the teacher for your child. Yeah. Instead of just listening to the director, walking down the hallway and peeking in the door. They tell they're going to be telling you as a parent the same thing they just told the past 20 parents that toured. Right. Right? But as parents, you have to get inside that classroom and talk directly, ask those critical, tough questions to the person that's going to be taking care of your little one.
Yeah, you don't want to find that out later. The hard way.
No. And sometimes you might not find it out at all. Right? You might not know. You might not know that they, at the end of the day, they just pack him and stuff up and throw,
chuck the rest of the lunch out.
Right. You don't know. So I just think that is critical in choosing the school that's most
I agree.
is best for your children. So
you told me a funny story the other day that I want to pause and go back to a little bit, because I think it's important. We've been talking a lot about how the parent should feel, but it's definitely important how the kids should feel too. And obviously that changes as the kids get a little bit older, but we want kids to love school. Yeah. They've got a long road ahead of them, especially starting in preschool, especially starting as an infant. So you told me a story the other day that I think is really funny to share with our listeners, because going back to how kids feel in school, I think you met a little guy who told you a lot of information.
Well, that's another great example of getting into the classroom, right? I'm glad you brought that up, because you're interviewing and you're asking questions to the teacher, right? And we just gave those examples. Right. But seeing how happy and engaged the children are, I think, is the most important. Yeah. Right. So the other day I went in and it was lunchtime, and I sat down, pulled up a chair, I'm sitting there talking to a group of children. I mean, one of the first questions they always say are like, "Who are you?" And I'm Mr. Richie.
So honest.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Richie. And then, who are you? And he's Johnny. And and now all 20 children. And I'm Mary Beth, and I'm Sammy. And it's funny how they always give their last names too, right? I'm names. Johnny Jones Harrison. And everybody's got a middle name. I'm like, just so 30 minutes later, after I get introduced to everybody, I'm sitting there, and and they're so engaging, so happy, and I'm sitting there, and I said, the little boy says, "Who are you, Mr. Richie? What are you doing here?" I'm just touring the classrooms and making sure you're having a great experience. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "Oh, I live here." And I'm like, you live here? But again, I thought that was such a great. He was so comfortable in being, in this. This was his school.
Yeah, and kids spend a majority of their day in school. Yeah. I always had to remind myself that as a teacher. I have these kids for 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, depending on when they're picked up. That's a really long time to be with someone. So they kind of do live here. He's kind of right.
And I said, "You live here, huh?" And he says, "Yeah, I live here." I was like, "Well, where do you sleep?" He goes, "I sleep on my cot." And he was just, he was such a treat. And
How old was he?
He was 3, I think.
3,
probably 3. Yeah, 3 and a half.
Sweet.
And again, you could just tell that he was just so happy in this class and with his friends, and just the interaction back and forth with some of his buddies, and it was just amazing.
That's how your kid should answer.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's okay on these tours too to talk to the kids and ask what they're doing. I think the way they respond says a lot.
And every single classroom, in my experience, will always have a classroom. We call them the classroom greeter or the classroom ambassador. Right? There's
Right.
always one child that will come straight up to you and say, "Who are you?
Yep.
What are you doing in my classroom?" And,
That's the one you want to talk to.
Exactly. and let me tell you a couple of things. That's the one you got to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So
it's okay to ask them questions.
maybe that's a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
Interview some of the children and see how they're doing.
I love talking to little kids. I think when they're super honest like that, you get more out of them than most.
Yeah. But again, I'm glad you brought that back, because it's so important to get inside the classroom and not only see, but be able to speak and ask the questions that are most important to you as a mom or a dad.
Yeah, I think overall that's probably the top thing we've kind of come to a conclusion on with both of our ideas today.
Okay.
But I mean, overall, I think it's also important that when you're touring and when you're looking, you have friends and parents and people you know with other kids too. So I think it's so important to share it. If you love it, share it. Tell your family, tell your friends, leave reviews, volunteer. And I say get involved and be a part of the community in your center. And if you find somewhere where you are happy and you love it and your kid loves it and you stick through it until your kid's in public school, I think you found a fantastic place that you have to share.
I agree. So that is our top, not
kind
five.
Of five.
Kind of five. I don't know how many we had there.
Overall.
But that is our thoughts,
and
I guess, insights around what to look for in a preschool. So I wish everybody luck in finding the perfect place for them and their family.
And again, I think it's important to share it. And when you do find a daycare you love, tell your friends, tell your family. And I know at least here at Celebrate, we have so many ways for parents and teachers to get involved with the schools. And it's part of what makes us a special place for learning and growing. Thank you for joining us today on Parenting and Teaching with Richie Huffman.
Thanks for tuning in. And remember, childhood only comes this way but once.
For more information, head on over to richiehuffman.com.
I'm Richie.
And I'm Ali.
And we look forward to seeing you again on another podcast.